I remember exactly where I was when I realized the full weight of my son David's betrayal. Standing in my garden, dirt under my nails, the late afternoon sun warming my back as I pulled weeds from between my prized hydrangeas. My phone buzzed. In my pocket, a text from David that would change everything. Mom, Vanessa thinks it would be best if you don't come over for Sunday dinner anymore. We need our space as newlyweds. Hope you understand. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 40 years of motherhood reduced to a text message. No call, no proper explanation. Just clinical words on a screen that made my stomach drop as if I'd missed a step on a staircase. I set my phone down on the garden bench and stared at my hands. They were weathered, veined, and spotted with age, but strong. These hands had cradled David when he was born, had cooled his fevers, had packed thousands of school lunches, had clapped at his graduation, and had signed the deed to the house, where he now lived with his new wife. The house that was apparently no longer welcoming to me. I didn't cry. Not right away. Instead, I finished my gardening with mechanical precision, showered off the dirt, and poured myself a glass of Merlot that I'd been saving for a special occasion. This felt special enough, in its own terrible way. Only then, as twilight fell and the shadows lengthened across my kitchen floor, did I allow the tears to come. David had always been my world. After his father walked out when David was just 5, claiming he wasn't cut out for family life, it had been just the two of us against the world. I'd worked 2 jobs, administrative assistant by day, waitress by night, saving every penny to give David the opportunities I never had. When he got into Columbia for his MBA, I'd sold my mother's jewelry to help with tuition. When he graduated and landed his first job at a prestigious consulting firm, I'd never felt prouder. We made it, Mom, he'd said, hugging me at his graduation ceremony. Everything you sacrificed was worth it. Then came Vanessa. She was beautiful, polished, and came from the kind of wealthy family that had vacation homes in the Hamptons and took skiing trips to Aspen. When David brought her home to meet me, I'd spent 3 days cleaning my modest 2-bedroom apartment, preparing his favorite childhood meals, and even splurged on new dinnerware that wouldn't look embarrassingly cheap. Vanessa had smiled tightly throughout dinner, picking at her food, eyes sweeping critically over my humble furnishings. She asked polite questions about my job as an office manager, but tensed visibly when I mentioned my weekend shifts at the diner. Later, I overheard her whispering to David in the hallway, "You never told me your mother was a waitress." The word, waitress, falling from her lips like something distasteful. Still, I tried. God knows I tried. I sent thoughtful birthday gifts that went unacknowledged. I offered to help with their wedding planning, only to be relegated to addressing invitation envelopes. I suggested hosting a small family dinner for the holidays and was told their schedule was just too packed. When they decided to buy their first home 3 years ago, I surprised them by offering to help with the down payment. I'd been saving for decades, a little nest egg I'd planned to use for a modest retirement condo somewhere warm. Instead, I signed over $200,000 to David and Vanessa, nearly my entire life savings. "This is just a loan, Mom," David had insisted, his eyes bright with emotion. "Once we're settled, we'll set up a repayment plan. I promise." I'd waved him off. "It's not a loan, sweetheart. It's a gift. All I want is to see you happy in your new home." What I didn't say was that I hoped this generosity would secure my place in their lives, that the door to their new home would always be open to me, that perhaps there might even be a small room where I could stay occasionally when I grew older. Not permanently. I valued my independence too much for that, but just close enough to remain a part of their lives. For a while, it seemed to work. Sunday dinners became a tradition. I'd bring dessert and listen attentively as Vanessa described her latest promotion at her father's investment firm or showed off new furniture that cost more than my monthly salary. I complimented everything, laughed at their jokes, and kept my opinions to myself. Then came their wedding, a lavish affair at Vanessa's parents' country club that made me feel like an awkward outsider. I wore my best dress, bought on sale, at Nordstrom and carefully altered to look more expensive, but still felt the pitying glances from Vanessa's friends and family. At the reception, I was seated at a table far from the wedding party, with distant relatives who barely knew David. "You must be so proud," an elderly aunt of Vanessa's had said to me, her voice dripping with condescension. "Your son marrying into the Harrington family. Quite a step up, isn't it?" I'd smiled politely and excused myself to the bathroom where I spent 10 minutes breathing deeply and reminding myself that this day wasn't about me. It was about David's happiness. That's all that mattered. After the wedding, the Sunday dinners became less frequent. My calls went unanswered for days. When I did see them, Vanessa dominated the conversation, often speaking about people and places completely unfamiliar to me, making no effort to include me. David, once so attentive and kind, began to mirror his wife's behavior, checking his watch frequently when I spoke and changing the subject when I mentioned anything about our past together. And now, this text message, a dismissal so casual it made the past 3 years of increasing distance seem like a carefully orchestrated withdrawal, as if they'd been gradually preparing me for my complete removal from their lives. I stared at my wine glass, now empty, and suddenly felt the full weight of my foolishness. I'd given away my financial security, my chance at a comfortable retirement, to a son who could discard me with a text message at his wife's behest. I picked up my phone and typed out several responses, deleting each one. What could I say? Beg. To be included. Remind him of my financial contribution to their home? Demand an explanation? None of these approaches would yield anything but pity or annoyance. Instead, I simply wrote, "I understand. Let me know if you change your mind." Then I set my phone down and stared out the window at the darkening sky. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with memories and realizations, each more painful than the last. By morning, something had shifted inside me. A lifetime of accommodation and sacrifice had hardened overnight into something else entirely. Resolution, determination, perhaps even a touch of righteous anger. With my first cup of coffee, I called my old friend Patricia, who had retired from her legal practice 2 years earlier. "I need advice," I said when she answered, "about real estate and loans." "Evelyn? What's going on?" Patricia's voice was concerned. We'd been friends since college, and she knew me well enough to hear the tension in my voice. "Remember that money I gave David for his house down payment? The gift that wasn't actually supposed to be a loan?" "Of course, your retirement fund. Did I ever tell you exactly how we arranged it?" Patricia paused. "You mentioned something about putting your name on the deed as a co-owner, for estate planning purposes." "Exactly," I confirmed, a strange calm settling over me. "David suggested it actually, said it would make things simpler down the road." Vanessa wasn't thrilled, but since I was contributing nearly 40% of the purchase price, she couldn't really object. "Evelyn," Patricia said slowly, "what are you thinking of doing?" I took a deep breath. "I'm not entirely sure yet, but I need to know my options." 3 hours later, I sat in Patricia's home office, surrounded by printouts of property records, mortgage documents, and state laws regarding co-ownership of real estate. The picture that emerged was both clearer and more complicated than I'd expected. Yes, I was legally a co-owner of the property, with a 40% stake based on my contribution to the purchase price. Yes, this gave me certain rights, but exercising these rights would mean potentially destroying what remained of my relationship with my son. The cleanest option, Patricia explained, would be to request that they buy out your share. You'd get your investment back, plus appreciation over the past 3 years. In this market, that's not insignificant. I nodded, calculating rapidly. So, instead of the $200,000 I put in, you'd be looking at close to $280,000, depending on the current valuation. The sum hung in the air between us. Money that could restore my retirement plans. Money that could give me freedom and security in my remaining years. Money that was legally mine. And if they can't or won't buy me out? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Patricia removed her reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Then things get messier. You could force a sale of the property, though that's an extreme measure and would involve legal proceedings. Or, she hesitated. Or what? Or you could assert your rights as a co-owner in other ways. Technically, you're entitled to use of the property, though that's complicated when it's their primary residence. You could also potentially renegotiate terms. Terms? Patricia sighed. Evelyn, what exactly are you hoping to achieve here? Do you want your money back? Do you want to punish David for pushing you away? Or do you want to repair the relationship? I stared out her office window, watching a pair of cardinals flit between the branches of a maple tree. Such a simple, natural relationship. Mother bird, baby bird. No complications, no rejection, just instinct and survival. I want... My voice caught, and I cleared my throat. I want respect. I want acknowledgement of what I've sacrificed. I don't want to be discarded like something embarrassing or inconvenient. Patricia's face softened with understanding. Then perhaps what you need is leverage, not revenge. Leverage, I repeated, tasting the word. It felt foreign on my tongue, yet strangely empowering. We spent the next hour discussing various approaches. By the time I left, clutching a folder of documents and notes, I had the beginnings of a plan. Not a perfect plan, certainly not one without risks, but a plan nonetheless. The following morning, I called a real estate attorney recommended by Patricia and scheduled a consultation. Then I called David, not texted but called, and left. A voicemail. David, it's Mom. I've been thinking about our arrangement regarding the house, and I believe we need to formalize some things. Nothing to worry about, just making sure everything is properly documented. Call me when you can. He called back within the hour, his voice tight with concern. Mom? What's this about the house? Is everything okay? Everything's fine, David. I've just been doing some financial planning, and my advisor suggested we should have proper paperwork regarding my investment in your home. A pause. But that was a gift. You said so yourself. Did I? Well, intentions sometimes get muddled, don't they? Kind of like how I thought I'd always be welcome for Sunday dinners. I kept my tone light, conversational, but I heard his sharp intake of breath. Mom, about that text. Vanessa was just... No need to explain, I interrupted. I understand. Completely. You two need your space as newlyweds. Perfectly reasonable. Similarly, I need to secure my financial future as a single woman approaching retirement. Also perfectly reasonable. Another pause. Longer this time. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying we should meet, preferably with our respective attorneys, to discuss options. My contribution to your home represents a significant portion of my retirement savings, and I need to ensure it's properly protected. Are you threatening us? His voice had risen, incredulous and angry. Threatening? Goodness, no. I'm simply being pragmatic. You've taught me that family relationships can change unexpectedly, so it's only prudent to have financial arrangements that don't rely on emotional bonds. The silence that followed was telling. I could almost hear the calculations running through his head, the realization dawning that I held more cards than he'd thought. When do you want to meet? He finally asked, his voice subdued. How about this Sunday? I believe my schedule has recently opened up. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen, hands trembling slightly. This wasn't me. I wasn't manipulative or vindictive. I'd spent my entire life putting others first, my son above all. But somewhere along the way, that selflessness had been reframed as weakness, my generosity taken for granted. Well, no more. If David and Vanessa wanted a business relationship rather than a family one, I could accommodate that. Co-ownership came with rights as well as responsibilities. If they didn't want me in their home as a mother, they could deal with me as a landlord. I poured myself another cup of coffee and opened my laptop. Time to research what constituted a fair market rent in their upscale neighborhood. After all, business was business, and sentimentality had no place in it. A lesson my son and his wife had taught me all too well. My finger hesitated over the keyboard for just a moment, a fleeting doubt crossing my mind. Was I going too far? Would this destroy any chance of reconciliation? But then I remembered the text message, so casually dismissive of decades of love and sacrifice. I remembered Vanessa's barely concealed disdain for my working-class background. I remembered feeling like an outsider at my own son's wedding, and I began to type. Sunday arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if the weather itself was stoking the fires of confrontation. I dressed carefully in a navy pantsuit I'd purchased years ago for important client meetings, back when I still believed appearance could bridge social divides. The fabric had held up well, still crisp and authoritative. I paired it with my mother's pearl earrings, small but real, armor of a sort. My attorney, Marcus Devereaux, met me at a coffee shop 2 blocks from David and Vanessa's home. He was younger than I'd expected when Patricia recommended him, perhaps mid-40s, with prematurely silver hair and kind eyes that belied his reputation as one of the most tenacious real estate attorneys in the city. "Are you certain about this approach, Ms. Reynolds?" he asked as we reviewed our strategy one final time. "There are less confrontational ways to recover your investment." I stirred my cappuccino, watching the foam swirl into intricate patterns. "I tried less confrontational for 3 years, Mr. Devereaux. It resulted in my effective banishment." He nodded, not entirely convinced, but professional enough not to push. "As you wish. Just remember, once we take this position, it will be difficult to walk back." "I understand the consequences," I said, closing the folder containing our carefully prepared documents. "Some bridges once burned aren't worth rebuilding anyway." David and Vanessa's house sat on a corner lot in Westbrook Estates, a development of mock Tudor homes with manicured lawns and luxury vehicles in circular driveways. My modest Camry looked conspicuously out of place as we pulled up, like a sparrow, among peacocks. David opened the door before we reached it, his expression a careful blank. He'd always been terrible at hiding his emotions, a trait he inherited from his father, so the neutrality was clearly rehearsed. "Mom," he said stiffly, then nodded at Marcus. "And you must be her attorney." "Marcus Devereaux," my lawyer confirmed, extending his hand with practiced cordiality. "Thank you for accommodating this meeting on a weekend." David led us through to their formal living room, a space I'd rarely been invited to use during my increasingly infrequent visits. Usually, I was directed to the kitchen or casual family room, areas deemed appropriate for a woman of my background, I supposed. Vanessa was already seated on one of their white linen sofas, her posture rigid, blonde hair pulled back in a severe chignon. Beside her sat a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who rose as we entered. "Howard Kleinman," he introduced himself. "The Bennett's attorney." The Bennetts. Not your son and daughter-in-law. The formality stung more than it should have, given my own decision to bring legal representation. "Please sit," Vanessa said, her voice pleasant but eyes cold. "Can I offer anyone refreshments?" "That won't be necessary," I replied, matching her tone precisely. I imagine none of us wants this to take longer than absolutely required. Marcus and I settled on the opposite sofa, the gleaming coffee table between us like a demilitarized zone. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed David shift uncomfortably, his gaze darting between his wife and me. "So," Howard began, tenting his fingers, "I understand there's some confusion about the nature of your financial contribution to this property, Ms. Reynolds." Marcus smiled thinly. No confusion whatsoever. My client provided $200,000 toward the purchase of this home and is legally recorded as a 40% co-owner on the deed. Those facts are indisputable. Yes, but the intent, Howard started. The intent was clearly a gift, Vanessa interjected, leaning forward. Evelyn said as much at the time. David, tell her. David cleared his throat, eyes fixed somewhere, beyond my left shoulder. Mom, you said it wasn't a loan. You said it was a gift. Those were your exact words. That's true, I acknowledged, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. At that time, I did view it as a gift. But gifts typically come with certain social reciprocities, don't they? When those implicit understandings are violated, one might reasonably reconsider the arrangement. Vanessa's cheeks flushed. Are you saying your gift had strings attached? That we were supposed to, what, tolerate your constant intrusions into our married life because you helped with the down payment? Vanessa, David warned quietly. But she ignored him. Because if that's the case, you should have drawn up a contract, she continued, her voice rising slightly, not presented it as a loving gesture from mother to son. I studied her face, beautiful, privileged, and utterly convinced of her own rightness. How strange to realize I'd spent years trying to please someone who fundamentally didn't see me as an equal. You're absolutely correct, I replied calmly. I should have formalized the arrangement from the beginning. That was my mistake, assuming family connections would remain intact without legal protection. I'm here to rectify that oversight. Marcus took his cue, opening his briefcase and removing several documents. We've prepared some options for consideration. Option 1 is straightforward. The Bennetts can buy out Ms. Reynolds' 40% ownership stake at current market value, which our appraisal places at approximately $320,000, reflecting the property's appreciation since purchase. Howard accepted the document, scanning it quickly. This figure seems inflated. We'd be happy to involve a neutral third-party appraiser, Marcus countered smoothly. Though I suspect you'll find our valuation conservative for this neighborhood. David's face had gone pale. $320,000? Mom, you know we don't have that kind of liquid capital right now, between the wedding and Vanessa's MBA. I kept my expression neutral, though inwardly I noted the irony. My entire adult life had been defined by financial sacrifices for David's education, yet his wife's advanced degree took priority over repaying what they owed me. Which brings us to option 2, Marcus continued, passing over another document. A structured payment plan over 5 years, with interest at prime plus 1%, secured by a formal lien on the property. Vanessa practically snatched the paper from Howard's hands. This is absurd. 5 years of payments that would essentially be a second mortgage? After you freely gave us this money? Option 3, Marcus pressed on, unmoved, would establish a formal landlord-tenant relationship reflecting Ms. Reynolds' 40% ownership. The Bennetts would pay monthly rent proportionate to her stake in the property, calculated at fair market value. Rent? David repeated incredulously. You want us to pay you rent to live in our own home? Your partially owned home, I corrected gently. And yes, that would be one solution. According to our research, comparable properties in this neighborhood rent for approximately $4,800 monthly. 40% of that would be $1,920 per month, payable to me. The room fell silent. Howard whispered something to Vanessa, who shook her head emphatically. This is emotional extortion, she finally said. You're punishing us because we needed some space as newlyweds. I leaned forward slightly, meeting her gaze directly. Is that what David told you? That I'm upset about being excluded from Sunday dinners? Her slight hesitation told me everything. David hadn't shared the full extent of my gradual marginalization. Of course he hadn't. It would require acknowledging his own complicity. Let me be perfectly clear, I continued. I'm not here because of a missed dinner invitation. I'm here because after decades of putting my son's needs before my own, often at significant personal cost, I've been systematically pushed aside. The text message was merely the culmination of a pattern, not its beginning. David flinched. Mom, that's not fair. We've been busy with… David, I interrupted. When was the last time you called me just to check in? When did you last remember? My birthday without a reminder from Facebook? When did you last ask about my health, my friends, my life? When did your wife last speak to me without that subtle edge of condescension in her voice? Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed. For once, she seemed without a ready retort. I gave you that money because I believed in family, I said, my voice softening slightly. Because I wanted to help secure your future, not because I expected to be waited on or consulted about every decision, but because I thought I'd remain a valued part of your life. Howard cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we could take a brief recess to… No need, I said. I've laid out 3 reasonable options. Buy me out, establish a payment plan, or formalize a rental agreement. Any of these would be legally appropriate given my stake in this property. And if we refuse? Vanessa challenged, though her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Marcus stepped in smoothly. Then, regrettably, we would need to petition the court for a partition sale. The property would be sold, proceeds divided according to ownership percentages minus substantial legal fees. I don't recommend that path for anyone involved. David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache despite everything. It was the same motion he'd made as a frustrated 10-year-old struggling with math homework, as a teenager asking to borrow the car, as a college student explaining why he needed more money for books. Can we have some time to consider these options? He asked quietly. Of course, Marcus replied. We can give you 1 week to… Actually, I interjected, I have a 4th option to propose. All eyes turned to me. Even Marcus looked surprised. This wasn't part of our discussion. I recently received notice that my apartment building has been sold. The new owners are converting to condominiums, and current tenants have 3 months to either purchase their units or vacate. This was true, though I hadn't planned to bring it up today. Purchasing isn't financially feasible for me, given that my retirement savings were invested here. Mom, I didn't know, David began, guilt flashing across his features. I held up a hand to stop him. My proposal is this. I move into this house, utilizing the 3rd bedroom as my private space. In exchange, I'll reduce the monthly rent calculation to just 20% of fair market value, approximately $960 per month, despite my 40% ownership stake. The silence that followed was absolute. I could practically see the calculations running behind Vanessa's eyes, the horror battling with financial pragmatism. You want to live here? She finally managed, her voice faint. It makes practical sense, I said reasonably. The house has more than enough space. I'd have my own bedroom and bathroom. I wouldn't interfere with your day-to-day lives. I'd simply be utilizing the investment I've already made in this property. That's completely unworkable, Vanessa sputtered. We're planning to start a family soon. That room will be a nursery. The 4th bedroom could serve that purpose, I pointed out. It gets better natural light anyway. There is no 4th bedroom, David said, confusion evident. The room you're currently using as your home office, which, from what I've seen, primarily houses your gaming equipment, David, could easily be converted. Howard leaned in to whisper urgently in Vanessa's ear. She shook her head vehemently, but he persisted. After a moment, she turned to us with a brittle smile. We'd like to request a brief private consultation, he said formally. Of course, Marcus agreed. We can step outside for a few minutes. No need. Vanessa stood abruptly. We'll use the kitchen. After they departed, Marcus turned to me with a raised eyebrow. That wasn't our discussed strategy. No, I admitted. It was improvisation. You don't actually want to live here, do you? With people who've made it clear they don't. Welcome your presence. I gazed around the immaculate living room, with its carefully coordinated furniture that had replaced the comfortable pieces David and I had selected together when he first moved in. The walls now held abstract art rather than family photos. Even the scent was different. Some expensive candle rather than the cinnamon potpourri I used to bring as housewarming gifts. Want to? No, I acknowledged. But sometimes the threat of something is more powerful than actually doing it. Marcus's eyes widened slightly. Then he chuckled. Ms. Reynolds, you might have missed your calling in negotiation. The kitchen door swung open, and the trio returned. Vanessa's face was flushed. David looked resigned, and Howard maintained his professional impassivity. After careful consideration, Howard began, my clients are prepared to accept option 2, the structured payment plan. They can commit to monthly payments of $6,000, clearing the full amount within 5 years. I nodded thoughtfully, though internally I was surprised. The payment amount was higher than we'd proposed. They must have been truly horrified by the prospect of sharing their home with me. That's a reasonable counteroffer, Marcus acknowledged. However, my client's circumstances have changed. With her impending housing situation, the buyout would need to be accelerated to provide funds for new accommodations. We'd need to see substantial upfront payment, say $100,000 immediately, with the remainder on the 5-year plan. Vanessa's composure finally cracked. This is extortion. First, she demands repayment for a gift. Then when we agree, she changes the terms again. What's next? Demanding we name our firstborn after her. Vanessa, please, David murmured, placing a restraining hand on her arm. She shook him off. No. I'm tired of tiptoeing around this. Your mother is manipulating you. Again, the way she always has. Using guilt, using money, using whatever leverage she can find. She couldn't stand that you were finally putting our marriage first, so she manufactured this entire crisis. I remained perfectly still as her words filled the room, letting each accusation land without visible reaction. When she finally ran, out of steam, I spoke quietly. Is that truly how you see me, David? As manipulative? As someone who used you rather than supported you? His eyes met mine for the first time that day, conflicted and pained. No, he admitted. But this feels like punishment, for one text message. It wasn't just a text message, I said softly. It was the culmination of years of gradual exclusion, of watching my son become someone who valued status and appearances over loyalty and history, of realizing that all my sacrifices counted for nothing against the influence of a new relationship. I gathered my purse and stood, suddenly weary of the entire charade. I'll simplify this. One option. Buy me out completely, $320,000 within 90 days. Until then, I expect monthly interest payments of $2,000. If you fail to meet those terms, I'll proceed with a partition sale. Marcus will draw up the paperwork. Mom, wait, David called as I headed for the door. Can't we discuss this reasonably? As family? I paused, hand on the doorknob, and looked back at my son. This grown man whom I barely recognized anymore. That's the thing about family, David. It works both ways. When you decided I wasn't family enough to include in your life, you also decided I wasn't family enough to gift hundreds of thousands of dollars to without expectation of return. Outside, the afternoon sun was still bright, mockingly cheerful against my somber mood. I waited until we reached the car before the mask of determination finally cracked. Are you all right? Marcus asked gently as I fumbled with my seatbelt. No, I admitted, my voice barely audible. But I will be. As we drove away, I didn't look back at the house with its perfect landscaping and imposing facade. Instead, I focused on the road ahead, already calculating how $320,000 could secure me a modest but comfortable new beginning, one where my worth wasn't determined by my willingness to be invisible. The days following the confrontation passed in a strange blur. I moved through my routines with mechanical precision. Work, errands, meals for one, occasional calls with Patricia who checked in daily, concern evident in her voice. But internally, something fundamental had shifted. The hurt remained, a deep, throbbing ache beneath my breastbone, but alongside it grew something unfamiliar, a fierce, protective pride in having finally stood up for myself. On Wednesday evening, Marcus called with an update. "The Bennett's attorney reached out today," he said, his tone measured. "They're proposing a modified payment plan, $50,000 up front, with the balance paid over 3 years at prime plus 2%. I sat at my kitchen table, absently tracing patterns on the worn wood surface. No, the terms I offered were clear. "Ms. Reynolds, Evelyn," Marcus said, his voice softening. "They're trying to negotiate in good faith. This could be a reasonable compromise." "Is it possible for them to meet my terms?" I asked. "Financially speaking." Marcus hesitated. "Based on the financial disclosure they've provided, it would be difficult, but not impossible. They'd likely need to liquidate some investments or secure a home equity loan." "Then my terms stand," I said firmly. $320,000 within 90 days, with interest payments until then. A soft sigh filtered through the phone. "May I ask why you're being so inflexible on this? It's clear you're hurt, and rightfully so, but—" "Because," I interrupted, "for once in my life, I want to prioritize my needs over making things easier for my son, because I spent 30 years compromising, sacrificing, accommodating, and it led me here, to a point where I'm disposable, because they need to understand that actions have consequences." After a moment of silence, Marcus said, "I understand. I'll convey your position." "Thank you," I replied, then added, "And Marcus? Find me a good realtor. I need to start looking at condos." The following Saturday, I met with Janet Kim, a realtor who specialized in properties for right-sizers, as she tactfully put it. No mention of seniors or downsizing, just people entering a new phase of life. "So," she said cheerfully as we sat in her office, "what are you looking for in your next home?" I'd thought about this extensively. Something modern, low maintenance, 1 or 2 bedrooms, but with a proper office space. I'm considering some consulting work after retirement, within walking distance of shops and restaurants, and— I hesitated, feeling slightly frivolous. "I'd like a view. Nothing spectacular. Necessary, just something pleasant to look at while having my morning coffee." Janet smiled. "That sounds perfectly reasonable. And your budget?" "Assuming the current situation resolves as expected, around $300,000. She nodded, making notes. "And timeline?" "I need to be out of my apartment within 90 days. "Tight, but doable," she said confidently. "Any particular neighborhoods you're considering?" I'd researched this too. "Riverview or Glendale Heights?" Janet's eyebrows rose slightly. "Both lovely areas. Different from your current location, though." What she didn't say, but we both knew. Both neighborhoods were across town from Westbrook Estates. As far from David and Vanessa as I could reasonably get while staying in the same city. "I'm ready for a change," I said simply. We spent the next hour discussing options, looking at listings, and scheduling viewings for the coming week. By the time I left her office, I felt a stirring of something like excitement. A new home, designed around my preferences alone. No compromises, no consideration of anyone else's needs or opinions. Just mine. On Sunday morning, I woke to a text from David. "Mom, can we talk? Just us. Please." I stared at the message for a long time, emotions warring within me. Part of me, the part that had been his mother for 40 years, wanted to respond immediately, to offer comfort and reconciliation. But the newer, harder part of me remembered his silence during Vanessa's tirade. remembered years of gradual distance. Eventually, I replied, "I'm free for coffee at 2 p.m. The cafe on Maple Street." His response came instantly, "I'll be there." "Thank you." The cafe was busy when I arrived, weekend patrons lingering over late lunches and early afternoon treats. I chose a table near the back, ordered a cappuccino, and waited. David arrived precisely at 2, scanning the room with nervous energy until his eyes found mine. He looked tired, shadows beneath his eyes, his normally immaculate appearance slightly rumpled. He'd lost weight, I noticed with a pang of maternal concern that I quickly suppressed. "Mom," he said, slipping into the chair opposite me. "Thank you for meeting me." I nodded, taking a measured sip of my coffee. "You wanted to talk?" He ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture nearly undoing my composure. "This has all gotten out of hand. The lawyers, the demands. It's not us. It's not who we are as a family." "Who are we as a family, David?" I asked quietly. "I thought I knew, but recent events suggest otherwise." He winced. "I know that text was hurtful. It was poorly handled. I should have called, should have explained better." "Explained what exactly? That your wife finds my presence distasteful? That I've become an embarrassment? That the working-class background that paid for your education is now something to be ashamed of?" "No, it's not like that," he protested, leaning forward. "Vanessa she has certain ideas about how things should be. Her family has different traditions, different expectations. And those automatically supersede yours? Ours?" David looked down at his hands. "It's complicated." "It's actually very simple," I countered. "You chose her over me. That's your right as an adult. But you don't get to make that choice without consequences." "Mom, that's not fair. Marriage requires compromise. You taught me that." "Compromise, yes. Complete capitulation, no." I set my cup down carefully. "Tell me truthfully, David. If Vanessa weren't in the picture, would you have sent that text? Would you have gradually excluded me from your life?" His silence was answer enough. "That's what I thought." I smoothed a napkin on the table, giving my hands something to do. "Do you remember when you were 14 and you wanted those expensive basketball shoes? The ones all the popular boys had?" He frowned at the apparent non sequitur, Air Jordans. "What does that have to do with—" "I worked double shifts for 3 weeks to buy those shoes," I continued. "You were so happy when I gave them to you, but the very next day, you came home without them. When I asked what happened, you admitted you'd hidden them in your locker because some boys made fun of you for having a mother who worked as a waitress." David flushed. "Mom, I was a kid. That was 26 years ago." "Yes, you were. And you apologized sincerely. You even wore those shoes until they fell apart despite the teasing." I met his eyes. "But now you're doing the same thing as an adult. Hiding me away because I don't fit the image you want to project. The difference is, this time you didn't even bother to apologize until there were financial consequences." He looked genuinely stricken. "Is that really what you think? That I'm ashamed of you?" "What else should I think? You've excluded me from events where Vanessa's family would be present. You've corrected me in conversation when I use the wrong terminology for things. You've rolled your eyes when I mention the diner. The evidence is overwhelming, David." "I never meant," he began, then stopped, recalibrating. "I didn't realize how it looked from your perspective." "Of course you didn't," I said, not unkindly. "Because you were only thinking about what made your life easier, what pleased Vanessa, what helped you fit into her world. I became an inconvenient detail." David was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, almost childlike. "I can't get the money within 90 days. We've looked at all the options. The market's down, so liquidating investments now would mean significant losses. We could get a home equity loan, but not for the full amount. And Vanessa's parents, He trailed off. Let me guess, I said dryly. They won't help because they think I'm being unreasonable? Actually, they don't know, he admitted. Vanessa doesn't want them to find out about the original arrangement. She says it would be humiliating for them to know we needed help with the down payment. I almost laughed at the irony. So your wife, who thinks I'm manipulative and controlling, is keeping financial secrets from her own parents to maintain appearances. It's not like that, David protested, but weakly. It's exactly like that, I said. And now you're here, without her knowledge, I assume, trying to negotiate more favorable terms. He had the grace to look ashamed. Mom, please, we're trying to make this work. Can't we find a compromise that doesn't involve lawyers and deadlines? Something that preserves our relationship? What relationship, David? I asked softly. The one where I give and you take? The one where I'm included only when convenient? The one where my feelings and dignity matter less than your wife's comfort? That relationship was already broken before I involved lawyers. A young barista approached, offering refills. We both declined, sitting in uncomfortable silence until she moved away. What do you want, Mom? David finally asked, his voice barely audible. Really want, beyond the money? The question caught me off guard. What did I want? Revenge? No, that wasn't it, despite the satisfaction I'd felt watching Vanessa's composure crumble. Respect? Closer, but still not quite it. I want to matter, I said finally. I want the decades of love and sacrifice I invested in you to count for something. I want to be treated with dignity, not as an embarrassing relic of your past. David's eyes filled unexpectedly. You do matter. You've always mattered. I've handled everything so badly. Yes, I agreed. You have. Can we fix this? Somehow? I studied his face, searching for the little boy who once looked at me like I hung the moon. He was still in there, somewhere, beneath layers of ambition and social climbing and Vanessa's influence. I don't know, I answered honestly. But not. With money, not anymore. David looked confused. What does that mean? It means I've had time to think since our meeting. And I've realized that forcing you to buy me out doesn't actually solve the real problem. I took a deep breath. So I'm changing the terms. Changing how? I still want my investment back, eventually, but I'm more interested in repairing what's broken between us, if that's even possible. I leveled my gaze at him. So here's my new proposal. I'll accept a 10-year payment plan, minimal interest, with payments you can actually afford. But in exchange, I want 1 year of honest effort to rebuild our relationship. What does that mean exactly? He asked cautiously. Weekly dinners for starters. Sometimes at my place, sometimes at yours. With Vanessa present. Real conversations, not polite small talk. I want to be included in family events, not every single one, but the important ones. And I want both of you to join me for volunteer work at the community center once a month. Volunteer work? He echoed, baffled. Yes, the center where I've been volunteering for the past 15 years. The one I've mentioned dozens of times, though you've clearly never listened. It provides services for low-income families, people from backgrounds very much like the one I raised you in. David had the decency to look embarrassed. I didn't realize you were still doing that. There's a lot you don't know about my life, I said. Because you haven't bothered to ask. He absorbed this silently, then said, And if we do this, the dinners, the events, the volunteering, you'll extend the payment timeline? Yes, contingent on genuine effort from both of you. If it becomes clear you're just going through the motions to secure better financial terms, all original conditions apply. David studied me, a new wariness in his expression. And how exactly would that be judged? By me, I said simply. Based on whether I feel you're sincerely trying to treat me as family rather than an obligation. That seems subjective. Relationships are subjective, David. That's rather the point. He considered this for a long moment, fingers drumming. Nervously on the table. Vanessa won't like it. I imagine not, I agreed. But if your marriage is strong enough, she'll accept that maintaining a relationship with your mother is important to you. If it's not, I shrugged. That's a different problem, and not one I can solve. Can I have some time to think about it? To talk to Vanessa? I nodded. Of course, but my original terms stand until you give me an answer. And David? I leaned forward slightly. This only works if it's what you truly want, not just what's financially expedient. I won't force my way into your life if I'm not genuinely welcome. As he left the cafe a few minutes later, shoulders bowed under the weight of decisions to come, I remained at the table, strangely peaceful. For the first time since receiving that text message, I felt I had reclaimed something essential. Not just my financial security, but my dignity, my worth. That evening, Janet called with news about a property, a corner unit in a new development overlooking the river, just within my budget. It ticks all your boxes, she said excitedly. And the building has a communal roof garden. I can show it to you tomorrow if you're interested. I am, I confirmed. But there's been a change in my situation. I may not have the full amount available as soon as I thought. Oh, Janet said, disappointment evident. Should we adjust our search parameters? I considered this, thinking of David's conflicted face, of the painful but necessary conversation we'd had, of Vanessa's probable reaction when he returned home and explained my new terms. No, I decided. Let's view it anyway. I have a feeling things are going to work out, one way or another. That night, I sat on my small balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. My phone rested on the table beside me, silent. No messages from David yet, which wasn't surprising. He'd need time to process, to speak with. Vanessa, to decide what our relationship was truly worth to him. Whatever choice he made, I realized with quiet certainty, I would be okay. The worst had already happened. I'd been rejected, dismissed, devalued by the person I loved most in the world. Yet here I sat, still breathing, still planning a future, still finding beauty in an ordinary sunset. I'd spent 40 years defining myself primarily as David's mother. Now I was rediscovering Evelyn Reynolds, a woman with her own desires, her own dignity, her own power. Whether I ended up in that riverside condo alone, or with a tentatively rebuilt relationship with my son, I would be living on my own terms. And that, I decided as darkness finally fell, was worth more than any house or inheritance or social standing could ever be. 3 days passed without word from David. I tried to keep busy, viewing the riverside condo with Janet. It was even more perfect than described. Putting in extra hours at work to distract myself, finally sorting through the boxes of David's childhood mementos I'd kept all these years. Each item I handled was a small heartbreak. His first pair of shoes, impossibly tiny now. The construction paper Mother's Day card with a lopsided heart. Participation medals from soccer tournaments where he'd spent more time picking dandelions than chasing the ball. 35 years of memories, carefully preserved. Would they matter to him anymore? Would they ever matter to his children, these tangible pieces of a history he seemed determined to rewrite? I was carefully wrapping his high school debate trophy when my phone rang. Vanessa's name flashed on the screen. My hand hovered over the device, temptation to ignore it warring with curiosity. Finally, I answered with a neutral, "Hello, Vanessa." Evelyn. Her voice was clipped, controlled. "I think we should talk, woman to woman." "I see," I said, matching her professional tone. "About what, specifically?" "About this emotional manipulation you're attempting with David." Each word precise, like a surgeon's scalpel. This pretense that what you really want is a relationship, not money. I set the trophy aside, focusing fully on the conversation. It's not a pretense, Vanessa, though I understand why you might think so. Do you? A humorless laugh. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you realized you couldn't get what you wanted through legal channels. So you've resorted to guilt and emotional blackmail instead. Is that what David told you? David is confused, she said dismissively. You've always known exactly which buttons to push with him. The disappointed mother routine. The martyr complex. The after all I've sacrificed narrative. I took a measured breath, refusing to be provoked. I understand you're upset. I'm not upset, she interrupted, voice rising slightly before she regained control. I'm concerned about my husband's well-being. David came home from your little coffee date looking like someone had died. He's barely slept since. That gave me pause. I'm sorry to hear that. It wasn't my intention to cause him distress. Wasn't it? Vanessa challenged. What exactly did you think would happen when you essentially told him he has to choose between financial security and his mother's love? Put that way, my proposal did sound manipulative. Had I become what she accused me of being, a mother weaponizing? Guilt? The thought was uncomfortable, but I pushed past it. That's not what I offered, Vanessa. I offered a path to rebuilding what's been broken, on both sides. The financial arrangements are separate from that. Are they? She pressed. Because it sounds suspiciously like you're offering better payment terms, only if we perform emotional labor to your satisfaction. I sighed, suddenly weary of the circular argument. What do you want from this conversation, Vanessa? Clearly you didn't call to better understand my perspective. A brief silence, then. I want you to withdraw your new offer and stick to the original terms, which you've already said you can't meet. We'll figure it out, she said firmly, even if it means taking on additional debt, even if it means asking my parents for help. Because what we won't do is subject ourselves to weekly evaluations of whether we're being authentic enough in our interactions with you. I caught the subtle shift, from David to we. Whatever internal conflict my son might be experiencing, Vanessa was determined to present a united front. I see, I said quietly. And has David agreed to this approach? Another telling pause. David understands what's at stake. Does he? Because it sounds like he's quite torn about the decision. Only because you've manipulated him into an impossible position, she snapped, composure finally cracking. Do you have any idea what you've done? We were building something good, something stable. Then you come along with your hurt feelings and financial threats, and suddenly our foundation is crumbling. The raw emotion in her voice caught me off guard. Beneath the polished exterior and sharp words, Vanessa sounded genuinely frightened. Not of me specifically, perhaps, but of the disruption I represented to the carefully controlled life she'd constructed. Vanessa, I said, gentling my tone, may I ask you something? And I'd appreciate an honest answer. What? Wariness had replaced anger. Why did you marry my son? Excuse me? Incredulity now. What kind of question is that? A sincere one, I assured her. Not an accusation. I'm genuinely curious about what drew you to David, what you love about him. That's private, she stammered, and completely irrelevant to this discussion. I don't think it is, I countered. Because the David I raised, the real David beneath the polished exterior and professional success, is kind, sensitive, a bit insecure, and deeply loyal to the people he loves. He leaves his socks on the bathroom floor, laughs too loudly at bad jokes, and cries at dog food commercials. He's terrible at accepting criticism and wonderful at remembering birthdays. That's my son. Silence stretched between us, pregnant with unspoken questions. The man you've been molding him into, I continued softly. The one who dismisses his mother with a text message and pretends he wasn't raised by a waitress. That's not David. That's someone else entirely. So I'm wondering, which version did you fall in love with? You don't know anything about our relationship, Vanessa said, but her voice had lost its edge, sounding almost defensive. You're right, I don't, because I've been systematically excluded from it, just as I've been excluded from David's life in any meaningful way. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. But here's what I do know, Vanessa. Relationships built on pretense don't last. If David is changing who he is to please you or your family, eventually that facade will crack. And when it does, the fallout will be far more damaging than some uncomfortable family dinners or embarrassing stories about his working-class upbringing. Is that a threat? She asked, voice barely audible. No, I said firmly. It's an observation from someone who's lived longer than you have. Take it or leave it as you will. Another long silence followed. When Vanessa spoke again, her tone had shifted subtly. What exactly would these dinners entail, hypothetically speaking? I hadn't expected this pivot. Just normal family gatherings, conversation, catching up on each other's lives, nothing performative or staged. And the volunteering? 4 hours, once a month, at the community center. They always need help sorting donations, serving meals, tutoring children. Simple work that matters. And if we did this, again, hypothetically, you'd extend the payment period with reasonable interest rates? Yes, I confirmed. 10 years, prime rate, manageable monthly payments. Vanessa was quiet for so long I thought she might have hung up. Finally, I need to discuss this with David, in detail, without pressure from either side. Of course, I agreed, a small flicker of hope kindling despite my best efforts to remain detached. And I want something in writing. A formal agreement that ties the payment schedule to specific, measurable actions, not your subjective assessment of our sincerity. Of course, she would want to quantify emotion, to turn relationship building into a contractual obligation with clearly defined parameters. It was so characteristic of her approach to life that I almost smiled. That seems reasonable, I conceded. I'll have Marcus draft something. Good, she said crisply, professional mask firmly back in place. We'll be in touch. After she hung up, I sat motionless, replaying the conversation. It hadn't gone as expected. Nothing with Vanessa ever did. But perhaps that was promising in its own way. She'd been willing to engage, to consider alternatives. And beneath her practiced corporate negotiation tactics, I'd glimpsed something vulnerable, something potentially genuine. I wouldn't call it a breakthrough exactly, but perhaps a hairline crack in her perfect facade? A possibility worth exploring. The next morning, I received a text from David. Mom, we'd like to meet tomorrow evening to discuss your proposal. Our place, 7 p.m. Dinner will be provided. Our place, not my home or the house, our place. And dinner, the first time I'd been invited to share a meal with them in months. Small gestures, but telling ones. I'll be there. Should I bring anything? I replied. Just yourself, came the response, followed quickly by, and an open mind. I spent the following day in a state of nervous anticipation, cycling between hope and cynicism. Was this a genuine olive branch or merely a more sophisticated negotiation tactic? Had my words to Vanessa made any impact, or was this completely her idea, another strategy to secure advantageous financial terms? When I arrived at their house, exactly, on time, dressed casually but carefully, David answered the door immediately, as if he'd been watching for me. Mom, he said, with a smile that seemed only slightly forced. Come in. The house smelled of roasting chicken and fresh herbs. Classical music played softly in the background, everything perfectly orchestrated, like a scene from a lifestyle magazine. Vanessa emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. Evelyn, good evening. Dinner's almost ready. David, why don't you pour your mother some wine? The practiced hospitality felt oddly comforting despite its artificiality. At least they were making an effort. I accepted the glass of white wine. David offered and followed them to the dining room, where the table was formally set for 3. Everything looks lovely, I said, taking the seat Vanessa indicated. Thank you for inviting me. Vanessa nodded acknowledgement, returning to the kitchen. David sat across from me, nervously adjusting his napkin. This is nice, I ventured. Yeah, he agreed, looking around as if seeing the room for the first time. It's been a while. An understatement, but I let it pass. How have you been, David? Really been? He seemed startled by the direct question, by the genuine interest behind it. Busy, he said automatically, then caught himself. Actually, that's not. I've been stressed, confused, trying to figure out how we ended up here. Before I could respond, Vanessa returned with a platter of perfectly arranged chicken, roasted vegetables, and herbed potatoes. The presentation was flawless, no doubt, copied from some upscale cooking blog, but I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she set it down. This looks delicious, I said sincerely. Did you make it yourself? A flash of defensiveness crossed her face, then reluctant honesty. The chicken and vegetables, yes. The potatoes came from that gourmet market on 5th Street. Smart choice, I said. Their prepared foods are excellent. I've never mastered the art of getting potatoes exactly right myself. Vanessa blinked, clearly thrown by my lack of criticism. Yes, they do a good job. Please, help yourself. The meal proceeded with cautious pleasantries. We discussed safe topics, the unseasonably warm weather, an upcoming exhibit at the art museum, David's recent business trip to Chicago. No mention of our legal situation, no reference to past tensions. Just 3 adults sharing a meal, carefully, navigating the boundary between genuine connection and polite fiction. It wasn't until coffee was served, in delicate china cups that had certainly never been used for casual family meals, that Vanessa finally broached the real purpose of the my. Evening. We've been discussing your proposal, she said, setting her cup down precisely. About the extended payment terms in exchange for regular, family interactions. I nodded, waiting. While we appreciate the financial flexibility it would provide, she continued, we have some concerns about the subjective nature of the arrangement. Understandable, I said. I believe we touched on that during our phone conversation. David glanced between us, eyebrows raised. You two spoke? When? Yesterday, Vanessa said smoothly. I thought it would be helpful to get some clarification before we met as a group. David looked mildly perturbed at being excluded from this preliminary discussion, but pressed on. Mom, we want to make this work, both the financial aspect and the relationship part. But we need clarity. I agree, I said, which is why I asked Marcus to draft a potential agreement. I reached into my purse and withdrew a slim folder. This outlines a payment schedule over 10 years, with interest at prime rate, and defines our personal arrangements in measurable terms. David accepted the folder, opening it between himself and Vanessa. They scanned the document silently, heads bent together. I watched their expressions shift as they absorbed the details. Relief at the generous financial terms, wariness at the personal obligations, surprise at the final clause. You're offering to babysit? Vanessa asked, looking up sharply. Once we have children? Up to twice a month as your schedules require, I confirmed. I thought it might be helpful, given the cost of childcare these days. But you've never... your experience is... Vanessa fumbled, clearly torn between practical appreciation and instinctive resistance to the idea. I raised a child successfully to adulthood, I pointed out mildly. I believe that qualifies as experience. David's lips twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. It's a generous offer, Mom. Thank you. Vanessa cleared her throat. We should discuss this privately before making any decisions. Of course, I agreed, rising from the table. Take all the time you need. The offer remains open. David walked me to the door, lingering on the threshold as if reluctant to end the evening. It really was good to see you, Mom, he said quietly. Despite everything. I studied his face, the face I knew better than my own, now lined with adult concerns but still unmistakably my child's. It was good to see you too, David, both of you. He hesitated, then asked, Do you think we can fix this? Really fix it? I don't know, I admitted honestly. It depends on whether we all genuinely want to. Relationships can't be forced, no matter how carefully the terms are defined. I want to, he said, voice low enough that Vanessa, still in the dining room, couldn't hear. I miss you. I miss who I am when I'm with you. Something tight and painful in my chest began to unravel at his words. I miss that too. But Vanessa. He stopped, shook his head. It's complicated. Marriage often is, I said gently. But if you both commit to honesty with yourselves and each other, there's always hope. He nodded, absorbing this. Then, in a gesture that caught me completely off guard, he leaned forward and wrapped his arms around me in a hug. Not the perfunctory, barely there embrace he'd offered at formal occasions over the past few years, but a real hug, like the ones he used to give before Vanessa, before ambition, before shame. I held him tightly, memorizing the feeling, storing it away against future disappointments. Because regardless of what agreement we reached, regardless of whether tonight's dinner was the beginning of genuine reconciliation or merely a sophisticated negotiation tactic, I had glimpsed the real David again. My son, not Vanessa's carefully, molded husband, and for now, that glimpse was enough to nurture hope. I'll call you tomorrow, he promised as we separated, after we've discussed everything. I'll be waiting, I said, and stepped out into the night air, breathing deeply. That stars were particularly bright overhead, the cool evening breeze carrying the scent of my neighbor's roses. As I walked to my car, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Not because everything was resolved, not because I trusted Vanessa's sudden hospitality, or even David's emotional awakening, but because I had reclaimed something essential, my ability to connect authentically despite hurt, to remain open to possibility without abandoning self-protection. Whatever came next, whether reconciliation or further separation, financial resolution or continued conflict, I would face it not as David's doormat mother or as Vanessa's social inferior, but as Evelyn Reynolds, a woman of worth, of dignity, of quiet, unshakable strength. The woman I had always been, beneath the roles and sacrifices. The woman I was finally learning to be again. They signed the agreement 3 days later in Marcus's office, a sleek space of glass and chrome that made me feel distinctly out of place with my sensible shoes and department store blazer. Vanessa, of course, looked perfectly at home, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. David sat between us, a physical embodiment of the bridge we were attempting to build, or rebuild. All parties understand the terms? Marcus asked, his professional demeanor firmly in place despite his private skepticism about the arrangement. When I'd first presented my revised proposal to him, he'd raised his eyebrows so high they nearly disappeared into his hairline. You're tying financial obligations to emotional ones, he'd observed. That's rarely advisable. Life isn't as compartmentalized as legal documents would suggest, I'd replied. Besides, what's the alternative? Forcing a sale they can't afford, or accepting that my son only values me for what I can give him materially? Now, watching Vanessa's manicured finger trace each clause before signing, I wondered if I'd made the right choice after all. Was I setting myself up for performative affection? For dinners filled with strained politeness rather than genuine connection? I understand. The terms, Vanessa confirmed, her signature flowing across the page with practiced elegance. As do I, David added, his own signature more hesitant, as if he were signing away something precious rather than securing favorable financial terms. When it was my turn, I paused, pen hovering above the paper. I want to be clear about something, I said, looking directly at both of them. This agreement outlines minimum expectations, the bare bones of rebuilding our relationship. But legal documents can't capture what really matters: sincerity, respect, genuine effort to understand each other. Vanessa's lips thinned slightly. We're aware of that, Evelyn. We've agreed to all your terms. I know, I acknowledged. And I appreciate that. I just want to be clear that I'm not looking for box checking or obligation fulfilling. I'm looking for my son back and for a chance at a real relationship with my daughter-in-law. Something flickered in Vanessa's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or wariness at being claimed as daughter-in-law when she'd done everything possible to keep me at arm's length. That's what I want too, Mom, David said quietly, reaching over to squeeze my hand. Just give us a chance to show you. With a nod, I signed my name, committing us all to this strange experiment in negotiated family reconciliation. Marcus provided copies to everyone, his expression carefully neutral. I'll file these with the county recorder's office to formalize the revised financial arrangement, he said. The first payment will be due next month, as outlined in Section 3. And our first official family dinner will be this Sunday, I added, folding my copy neatly into my purse. My place, 6 o'clock. I'll provide the main course. Perhaps you could bring dessert? We'll be there, David confirmed, before Vanessa could respond. Should we bring wine as well? That would be lovely. I gathered my belongings, suddenly eager to escape the formality of the office, the weight of signatures and legal obligations. Red pairs well with what I'm planning. Outside, spring had fully arrived, the courthouse plaza blooming with tulips and dogwoods. I paused to breathe deeply, letting my shoulders relax after the tension of the meeting. Mom, wait up, David called, jogging down the steps after me. Vanessa remained at the top, phone pressed to her ear, already moving on to her next appointment. Is everything all right? I asked as he reached me. Yes, He glanced back at his wife, then lowered his voice. I wanted to say thank you for giving us this chance, for not forcing the sale. You're my son, I said simply. Despite everything, that hasn't changed. His eyes, so like his father's, crinkled at the corners. I know I've been distant, more than distant. I let things go too far. Let myself get caught up in... He gestured vaguely upward, where Vanessa still stood, sunlight glinting off her diamond earrings. You were trying to please your wife, I said, not unkindly. That's natural in a new marriage. Maybe. But I lost perspective. He ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture that always betrayed his inner turmoil. I forgot who I was, who raised me. I'm not proud of that. The past is past, I said, patting his arm. Let's focus on moving forward. He nodded, then surprised me with another quick hug before jogging back up the steps to Vanessa, who had finished her call and was watching our interaction with an unreadable expression. As they walked away together, his hand at the small of her back, I couldn't help wondering whether our agreement would truly heal what was broken, or simply paper over the cracks with polite obligation. Only time would tell. Sunday arrived with unexpected anxiety. I spent the morning cleaning my modest apartment with obsessive attention to detail, much as I had before Vanessa's first visit years ago. This time, however, I refused to apologize for my surroundings through excessive preparation. My home was clean, comfortable, and filled with objects that told the story of my life, including my life with David. If that made Vanessa uncomfortable, so be it. I prepared my signature pot roast, David's favorite since childhood, with potatoes. Carrots and pearl onions slowly simmered until they melted in your mouth. The recipe wasn't sophisticated or trendy, but it was honest, hearty food that had sustained us through years of tight budgets and small celebrations. A quiet statement in its own way. They arrived precisely at 6, David carrying a bottle of surprisingly good Cabernet, Vanessa bearing a bakery box that I suspected contained something elaborately decorative rather than genuinely delicious. "Welcome," I said, stepping aside to let them in. "Thank you for coming." "It smells amazing in here," David said, inhaling deeply. "Just like I remember." "Pot roast," I confirmed, accepting the wine with a smile. "I thought we'd start with something familiar." "How homey," Vanessa commented, handing me the dessert. "Box." "We brought tiramisu from Bellini's. I hope that pairs well." "Perfectly," I assured her, peering into the box at the immaculate layers of mascarpone and espresso-soaked ladyfingers. "It looks beautiful." The early conversation was stilted, focused primarily on safe topics like the weather and local news. I served the meal family style, placing the large pot directly on the table rather than plating individual portions in the kitchen as Vanessa clearly expected. David fell upon the food with enthusiasm, helping himself to a generous portion and sighing with pleasure at the first bite. "Just as good as I remember," he said, closing his eyes briefly. "Maybe better." "The secret is patience," I said, pleased by his reaction. "Low and slow, that's the only way to make tough cuts tender." "It's very flavorful," Vanessa offered, taking a delicate bite. "You'll have to share the recipe sometime." "Of course," I agreed, though we both knew she had no interest in preparing working-class comfort food in her gourmet kitchen. "It's quite simple, really. Just time-consuming." As the meal progressed, David gradually relaxed, reminiscing about family, dinners from his childhood, occasionally explaining to Vanessa references she didn't understand. She listened politely, contributing little, her posture still rigidly formal despite being perched on my well-worn dining chair. "Remember that Christmas when the oven died halfway through cooking the turkey?" David asked, laughing. "You were so determined to save dinner that you went knocking on neighbors' doors until you found someone who was out of town and got their super to let you use their oven, Mrs. Abernathy," I recalled, smiling at the memory. She was visiting her daughter. "In Florida, we had to carry that half-cooked turkey 3 floors up, dripping pan juices the whole way." "But it was the best turkey ever," David insisted. "We ate leftovers for a week." "We ate leftovers every week," I reminded him. "It was called budgeting. Something." In my tone must have shifted because David's smile faltered slightly. "I know, Mom. You stretched every dollar impossibly far. I never appreciated that enough." "Ancient history," I said lightly, not wanting to derail the pleasant atmosphere with heavier topics. "More potatoes, Vanessa?" She declined with a polite smile. "It was delicious, but I'm saving room for dessert. Besides, I have that charity gala next weekend, and this dress was already snug at the final fitting." "What charity?" I asked, genuinely curious. This was exactly the kind of detail about their lives I'd been excluded from for so long. "The Metropolitan Museum Young Patrons Circle," she explained. "It's their annual fundraiser for arts education in underserved schools." "That sounds worthwhile," I said sincerely. "I've always believed in the importance of arts education. When David was in elementary school, I volunteered with a program that brought music instruction to schools that had lost their funding for it." Vanessa looked genuinely surprised. "You did?" David never mentioned that. I glanced at my son, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "There's a lot about me he hasn't shared, I imagine." "Mom was always volunteering somewhere," David said, his tone a mix of pride and defensiveness. "Community garden, literacy program at the library, that music thing. Even when she was working double shifts." "You make me sound like some kind of saint," I demurred. I just believed in contributing where I could. Still do, as a matter of fact. Which reminds me, I took a sip of wine, then continued casually. Per our agreement, we're scheduled for volunteer work at the community center next Saturday morning, 9 to 1. The sudden tension in Vanessa's shoulders was almost comical. Next Saturday? I'm not sure if that works with our... It's on the calendar, David interrupted. We checked before signing the agreement, remember? No conflicts. Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line before she recovered her composure. Of course. I just forgot momentarily. What exactly will we be doing at this community center? They're holding a career day for high school students from low-income neighborhoods, I explained. Mock interviews, resume workshops, that sort of thing. Given your positions in finance and consulting, you're actually perfect for it. That doesn't sound too bad, David said, visibly relieved. I suspected he'd been imagining something more physically demanding or potentially messy. Not at all, I agreed. Just sharing your expertise with young people who could really benefit from it. Vanessa nodded slowly, perhaps realizing this was an opportunity to showcase her professional accomplishments rather than a disagreeable chore. I suppose I could prepare a short presentation on pathways into financial services. Wonderful, I said, standing to clear the plates. They'll be thrilled to have your participation. Now, shall we move on to that beautiful tiramisu? As I served the dessert in my everyday dishes rather than anything approximating the elegant plating Bellini's surely provided, I caught Vanessa studying a framed photograph on my sideboard. David at his college graduation, one arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming with pride and exhaustion after years of sacrifice to reach that moment. He looks so young there, she commented when she noticed my gaze. 22, I confirmed, though he'd already lived through more challenges than many people twice his age. Something flickered in her expression. Curiosity, perhaps, or the dawning recognition that her husband had existed long before she met him, shaped by experiences she knew little about. I'd like to hear about that sometime, she said quietly, if you're willing to share. It was the first genuine overture she'd made, small but significant. Not demanded as part of our agreement, not performed for David's benefit, but offered as a tentative step toward understanding. I'd like that too, I said simply. The remainder of the evening passed with increasing ease, the three of us slowly finding a rhythm of conversation that, while not entirely natural, was at least less strained than at the beginning. When they left shortly after 9, David hugged me warmly, and even Vanessa offered a brief, somewhat awkward embrace. Thank you for dinner, she said formally. It was enlightening. You're welcome anytime, I replied, meaning it more than I had expected. To both of you. After they departed, I sat on my small balcony with a final glass of wine, reflecting on the evening. It hadn't been perfect by any means. There had been moments of tension, awkward silences, topics carefully avoided. But beneath the performance, aspects, which I'd anticipated, I'd glimpsed something promising. David reconnecting with parts of himself he'd suppressed, and Vanessa displaying genuine curiosity about the history that had shaped her husband. It was a beginning. A small one, perhaps even a fragile one, but a beginning nonetheless. The real test would come next Saturday at the community center, where both of them would be well outside their comfort zones, interacting with people from backgrounds more similar to my own than to Vanessa's privileged upbringing. How they handled that would tell me far more about the potential for genuine reconciliation than any number of carefully managed dinner parties. As I finished my wine, watching the city lights flicker against the darkening sky, my phone chimed, with a text from Janet. Just heard back on your application for the Riverside condo. It's approved. When can you come in to sign the paperwork? I stared at the message, emotions conflicting within me. Just days ago, I'd been certain that my future lay in that beautiful corner unit, far from David and Vanessa, building a new life independent of my identity as a mother. Now, with the tentative bridges being constructed between us, I felt suddenly uncertain. Was I ready to commit to living across town from them? To making a clean break geographically even as we attempted to repair our relationship? Or was physical proximity important to rebuilding what had been broken? Can I think about it for a few days? I texted back. I need to consider some new developments in my situation. Janet responded immediately. Of course, but don't wait too long. Other buyers are interested. I set the phone aside and leaned back in my chair, gazing up at the stars barely visible through the city's light pollution. The future I'd imagined for myself was within reach. Financially secure, independently housed, free from the painful cycle of expectation and disappointment that had characterized my relationship with David in recent years. Yet today had reminded me of what I stood to lose by cutting those ties completely. The chance to know my son as an adult, to perhaps someday know his children, to weave back together the frayed threads of our shared history. The choice wasn't simple, nor was it final. I could sign a lease on the Riverside condo and still maintain our agreement, still work toward reconciliation. Physical distance didn't have to mean emotional distance after all, but something in me hesitated at committing to that separation, that clear declaration of independence, when reconciliation still felt possible, however uncertain. I finished my wine and went inside, leaving the decision for another day. For now, I would focus on the immediate future, preparing for Saturday's volunteer session, for watching David and Vanessa navigate a world so different from the carefully curated bubble they'd constructed around themselves. That would tell me everything I needed to know about whether our tentative peace had any chance of evolving into genuine family bonds, and whether my future should include proximity to them or the clean slate of the Riverside condo, beautiful but entirely my own. Saturday morning dawned bright and unseasonably warm. I arrived at the Westside Community Center an hour early, as I always did when volunteering, to help Elena, the coordinator, set up for the Career Day event. The old gymnasium had been transformed, with rows of folding tables, each designated for a different professional field: healthcare, education, trades, technology, and business. Your son and daughter-in-law are really coming? Elena asked as we arranged chairs. She'd known me for 15 years, had watched David grow from a gangly teenager to a college graduate, had witnessed my pride when he landed his first corporate job, and had offered tissues and chocolate when I confided how he'd gradually slipped away from me. That's the plan, I confirmed, straightening a stack of career pamphlets. Whether they'll be enthusiastic participants remains to be seen. Elena chuckled. Well, I've allocated them to the business table. Based on what you've told me, your daughter-in-law should be in her element talking about corporate success, no? That's one way of putting it, I agreed, smiling despite my nerves, though I'm not sure how she'll respond to the actual students. You mean kids who haven't had every advantage handed to them? Elena's eyebrow arched. Could be educational for all involved. At precisely 9 o'clock, David and Vanessa walked through the double doors of the community center. They were dressed in what I imagined they considered casual professional. David in pressed khakis and a button-down with the sleeves rolled up. Vanessa in slim black pants and a silk blouse that probably cost more than the center's monthly utility bill. Both wore expressions of careful neutrality, taking in the institutional beige walls, the scuffed linoleum floor, the mismatched furniture donated from various offices over the years. Mom, David called, spotting me by the registration table. He quickened his pace, something like relief crossing his features at seeing a familiar face in this unfamiliar territory. We made it. Right on time, I confirmed, hugging him briefly, before turning to Vanessa. Thank you both for coming. This means a lot to the center. Vanessa nodded, surveying the room with the assessing gaze of someone mentally cataloging improvements she would make if put in charge. It's very organized, she finally offered, clearly searching for something positive to say. Elena runs a tight ship, I agreed, gesturing toward my friend who was directing other volunteers with characteristic efficiency. She's been managing programs here for almost 20 years. On a shoestring budget, no doubt, Vanessa murmured, then seemed to catch herself. I mean, that's impressive dedication. It is, I confirmed, choosing to accept the amended comment at face value. She's transformed lives in this neighborhood, including mine, after your father left and I was struggling to balance work and childcare. David glanced at me, surprise evident. I didn't know you used services here. Where did you think you went after school while I was working? I asked, genuinely curious about what he remembered. You were in their after-school program for 3 years. Elena helped me apply for reduced fees when I couldn't make ends meet. David frowned, clearly searching his memory. I remember coming to a place with other kids, playing basketball, getting help with homework. Was that here? This very building, I confirmed. You loved it, especially the junior robotics program they offered on Thursdays. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, remembrance, a connection re-established with a part of his past he'd forgotten or deliberately set aside. The robot wars, he said slowly. We built those little machines from kits and had them battle each other. I won the spring tournament when I was 10? 11? 11, I confirmed, warmth spreading through me that he remembered. You were so proud of that trophy. You insisted on keeping it on your dresser instead of the shelf. Vanessa watched this exchange with an unreadable expression, perhaps seeing a version of her husband she hadn't encountered before, the working-class child whose after-school care had depended on community services and reduced fees. Elena approached, clipboard in hand. You must be David and Vanessa. I've heard so much about you both. I'm Elena Vasquez, program director. Nice to meet you, David said, extending his hand. I apparently spent a lot of time here as a kid, though the memories are a bit fuzzy. You were one of our robotics stars, Elena confirmed with a warm smile. I still use your victory as an example when recruiting kids for STEM programs. The boy who designed an unbeatable robot and went on to Columbia Business School. David looked genuinely touched. You remember that? I remember all my kids, Elena said simply, especially the ones who find their way back to us. She turned to Vanessa. And you're in investment banking, Evelyn mentioned? We have several students specifically interested in finance careers. They'll be thrilled to get advice from someone established in the field. Vanessa straightened slightly, professional instincts engaging. Yes, I'm a vice president at Harrington Capital, happy to share insights about educational requirements and career paths. Wonderful, Elena said briskly. The students will start arriving in about 15 minutes. David, Vanessa, you'll be at table 4, business and finance. Evelyn, you're at your usual spot with healthcare, since that's where your office management experience is most relevant. As Elena moved away to direct other volunteers, David turned to me with a questioning look. You've never mentioned that. You specifically volunteer with healthcare career guidance. You've never asked about my volunteer work, I pointed out gently. Despite the fact that I've been doing it nearly every month for 15 years. He had the grace to look embarrassed. Fair point. It's nothing fancy, I explained, leading them toward their assigned table. I talk to kids interested in healthcare administration, front office work, patient coordination. The jobs that don't require advanced degrees but keep the system running. Before I was an office manager at Dr. Brenner's practice, I worked as a medical receptionist at County General. I can give practical advice about entry-level positions, certificate programs, career advancement. Vanessa frowned slightly. But shouldn't we encourage these students to aim higher? Pre-med, nursing degrees, that sort of thing? Some will go that route, I acknowledged. But others need to support themselves or their families immediately after high school. They need pathways that provide steady income while potentially pursuing further education. Not everyone has the luxury of 4 uninterrupted years of college. Before Vanessa could respond, the doors opened and students began filtering in. Teenagers from local high schools, most from lower-income neighborhoods, many first-generation Americans whose parents spoke limited English. They moved through the space with varying degrees of confidence, some purposeful, heading directly for specific career tables, others hanging back, uncertain, needing encouragement from the counselors who accompanied them. I watched David and Vanessa as they registered the reality of the event, not a theoretical exercise in charity, but a room full of actual young people with complex lives, limited resources, and genuine aspirations. Vanessa's expression remained professionally composed, but I caught the momentary widening of her eyes, the slight stiffening of her posture as the first group of students approached their table. For the next 2 hours, I divided my attention. Between my own advisees and discreet observation of my son and daughter-in-law, David, to my quiet pride, adapted quickly. His initial awkwardness gave way to genuine engagement as he responded to questions, shared anecdotes about his own career path, listened attentively to students' concerns about college affordability and work-study balance. Vanessa was more reserved, her responses technically correct but somewhat rigid, as if she were conducting abbreviated job interviews rather than guiding hopeful teenagers. Yet even she began to thaw slightly when a quiet girl with meticulously braided hair asked pointed, intelligent questions about sustainable investment strategies and corporate responsibility metrics. During a brief lull, I approached their table with coffee from the volunteer refreshment station. "How's it going?" I asked, setting the cups before them. "Better than expected," David admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "These kids are really motivated. That young man in the blue shirt, Jorge, he's already running a small business, fixing computers for people in his neighborhood. He's got better entrepreneurial instincts than half my MBA classmates did. Many of these students have been contributing to their family economies since they were 12 or 13, I said. They understand work ethic and resource management in ways privileged kids often don't." Vanessa sipped her coffee, her expression thoughtful. "They have significant knowledge gaps, though. That girl who wants to go into sustainable finance, Amara? She's never even heard of the Bloomberg terminal or the CFA designation. How can she compete without that basic awareness?" "That's exactly why we do these events," I pointed out. "To bridge those gaps. Information access is one of the most insidious forms of inequality." Vanessa considered this, then nodded slowly. "I suppose I could create some sort of information packet, resources, terminology, key concepts, even a suggested reading list." "That would be incredibly helpful," I said, genuinely impressed by her initiative. "Elena could distribute it to students interested in finance careers." "I'll do that," Vanessa decided, pulling out her phone to make a note. "And perhaps—" She hesitated, then continued with uncharacteristic uncertainty. "Perhaps I could return occasionally? To provide more specific guidance?" David looked as surprised as I felt. "You'd want to come back here? Regularly?" Vanessa straightened defensively. "Why not? It's a far more practical use of my expertise than those ridiculous charity galas where rich people congratulate themselves for writing checks while eating 500 per plate dinners." A startled laugh escaped me before I could suppress it. It was perhaps the most honest, unguarded statement I'd ever heard from Vanessa, and the most aligned with my own values. "That's refreshingly blunt," I said. "Yes, well." She smoothed her already immaculate hair. "Don't look so shocked. I didn't emerge fully formed from a Neiman Marcus catalog, you know. My grandparents were immigrants. My father was the first in his family to attend college. I'm not completely disconnected from the concept of socioeconomic mobility." This glimpse beneath her carefully maintained facade left me momentarily speechless. David, too, seemed to be seeing his wife with new eyes. "You've never mentioned that," he said quietly. "You never asked," she replied, echoing my earlier words to him. "Besides, It doesn't exactly fit with the narrative my parents have constructed. 2 generations was enough to transform the family story from hardworking immigrants to established wealth in their social circle. The struggle chapters have been quietly omitted. Before we could pursue this revelatory conversation further, a new wave of students approached the table, and we returned to our respective roles. But I carried Vanessa's disclosure with me throughout the remainder of the session, recalibrating my understanding of this woman who had seemed so one-dimensional in her privileged perfectionism. When the event concluded at 1 o'clock, the 3 of us joined other volunteers in rearranging the gymnasium for an afternoon seniors program. As we worked, I noticed David and Vanessa engaged in quiet but intense conversation, occasionally glancing my way. Finally, as we gathered our belongings to leave, David approached me. "Mom, we were wondering, would you like to join us for lunch? There's a cafe a few blocks from here that Vanessa spotted on the drive-in." "That would be lovely," I said, surprised and pleased by the spontaneous invitation, the first they had extended since our negotiated reconciliation began. The cafe turned out to be a small farm-to-table establishment, tucked between a hardware store and a second-hand bookshop. Despite its unassuming exterior, the menu featured artisanal ingredients and thoughtfully composed dishes, exactly the sort of discovered gem that Vanessa would appreciate. Once seated with glasses of iced tea and locally sourced salads, David cleared his throat. "Mom, we've been talking about the volunteer session, about your history with the community center, about a lot of things, actually." "Oh?" I kept my tone neutral, though my pulse quickened slightly. "I've realized how much I've forgotten," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "Or maybe not forgotten exactly, but compartmentalized. Separated into before and after, in a way that isn't really honest." "David has been sharing more about your early years together," Vanessa interjected, her tone less clipped than usual. "The challenges you faced as a single mother, the sacrifices you made for his education. I'm beginning to understand that there's a lot more to your history than I had appreciated." "There's more to everyone's history than we initially see," I offered. "Including yours, it seems." Vanessa nodded, acknowledging the reference to her earlier revelation. "My parents," she began, then paused, recalibrating. "My father worked extraordinarily hard to distance himself from his beginnings. He believed complete reinvention was necessary for success, that his children should never know the uncertainty he experienced growing up. I was raised to focus exclusively forward, never backward. And so you applied the same expectation to David," I suggested gently. "Forward momentum only, no acknowledgement of the path that led here." "I suppose I did," she admitted, surprising me with her candor. "It seemed cleaner that way, more aligned with the life we were building." "But we've been talking," David continued, reaching across the table to cover my hand with his. "And we've realized that trying to erase the past, my past, our past, isn't just hurtful to you. It's unhealthy for us, for our future, including any children we might have. Family history matters," Vanessa added quietly. "Even the complicated, imperfect parts, perhaps especially those." I sat very still, absorbing this unexpected shift, wary of attaching too much significance to what might be merely post-volunteering emotional reactivity rather than genuine evolution. "I appreciate that perspective," I said carefully. "May I ask what prompted this particular revelation?" David and Vanessa exchanged glances. "Honestly," David said, "watching you at the community center today, you were so at home there, connected to people, comfortable in your own skin. I realized I've been almost embarrassed by that part of you, the part that values community service and has relationships with people from all walks of life. And then it hit me how utterly backwards that is. Those qualities are what make you extraordinary. And Vanessa added, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Seeing those students today, their determination despite having so much less support than I had growing up, it was perspective shifting. Makes my parents' fixation on appearances seem rather hollow by comparison. I sipped my tea, allowing myself to absorb the unexpected sincerity in their words. Was this simply another performance, an extension of our contractual relationship, or a genuine shift in understanding? Only time would tell, but something in their expressions, a vulnerability I hadn't witnessed before, suggested at least the possibility of authentic change. Well, I said finally, setting down my glass, this conversation certainly isn't what I expected when I woke up this morning. We'd like to try again, David said earnestly. Not just going through the motions of the agreement, but really building something new, something better. Something honest, Vanessa added, with all our complicated histories acknowledged, not just the polished parts. The cynical part of me, the part still raw from rejection, still wary of being hurt again, wanted to question their sincerity, to guard against potential disappointment. But another part, perhaps the wiser part, recognized that genuine reconciliation required openness to possibility, willingness to risk. I'd like that too, I said simply. 6 months passed with a rhythm I'd never expected to find. Weekly dinners rotated between my apartment and their home, the formality gradually giving way to something resembling comfort. Monthly volunteer sessions at the community center evolved from obligation to genuine commitment, particularly for Vanessa, who surprised everyone, including herself, by developing a mentorship program for girls interested in finance careers. Though our relationship remained a work in progress, conversations occasionally still stiffened when certain topics arose, and Vanessa sometimes retreated into cool professionalism when feeling vulnerable. The change was undeniable. David had reclaimed parts of himself I'd feared lost forever, speaking more freely about his childhood, laughing more easily, even occasionally disagreeing with his wife in my presence, something unimaginable months earlier. The morning I'd planned to give Janet my final decision about the Riverside condo, my phone rang with Vanessa's distinctive ringtone. "Evelyn," she began without preamble, her voice taut with what sounded like nervous excitement. "Are you free for lunch today? Just us?" The request, our first one-on-one meeting not mandated by our agreement, caught me off guard. "Yes, I believe. So, is everything all right?" "Fine. Everything's fine." A pause. "I'd just like to discuss something with you, privately." We agreed to meet at a small French bistro equidistant between our workplaces. When I arrived, Vanessa was already seated, an untouched glass of water before her, fingers nervously adjusting and readjusting her silverware. "Thank you for coming," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. "I appreciate your flexibility." "Of course," I replied, studying her face for clues. Despite our improved relationship, Vanessa remained difficult to read, her professional polish serving as effective emotional armor. "What's on your mind?" She drew a deep breath, squaring her shoulders as if preparing for a board presentation. "I wanted to speak with you directly, without David present, about a significant development." Another measured breath. "I'm pregnant. 10 weeks. Joy surged through me with unexpected force. "Oh, Vanessa," I breathed. "That's wonderful news." She nodded, a smile breaking through her composure. "We've been trying for almost a year. It's early still, but the doctor says everything looks perfect." "Does David know?" "Yes, I told him last night." Her smile softened. He cried. I've never seen him quite so undone. I could imagine it perfectly. My emotionally guarded son overwhelmed by the prospect of fatherhood, a role he'd both yearned for and feared since his own father's abandonment. "He'll be an amazing father," I said with certainty. "I know." Vanessa's gaze met mine directly. "Because he had an amazing mother." The simple acknowledgement, something she would have been incapable of expressing 6 months earlier, left me momentarily speechless. "Thank you," I managed finally. "That means a great deal coming from you." She nodded, then squared her shoulders. Again. "Which brings me to the reason I wanted to speak with you privately. I would like to make some changes to our arrangement." My guard instantly rose. Despite our progress, financial matters remained delicate territory. "What kind of changes?" "I want to accelerate the payment schedule," she said, surprising me yet again. "With the baby coming, I'd like to clear this debt more quickly." "That's not necessary," I began. "Our agreement—" "Please," she interrupted, uncharacteristically direct. "This isn't about the legal agreement anymore. This is about family, about the future." She placed both hands flat on the table, steadying herself. "When we first negotiated terms, I saw it purely as a financial transaction, a way to maintain control while minimizing damage. I couldn't understand what you were really offering." "And now?" I prompted gently. "Now I understand that you were offering reconciliation, a chance to build something genuine despite how badly I had treated you." She met my eyes directly. "I want my child to know their grandmother, not as someone we have a complicated financial arrangement with, but as family, real family." The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. Something had fundamentally shifted in Vanessa. Perhaps the perspective that often comes with impending parenthood, the sudden recognition of how much one's own childhood shapes one's approach to raising children. "I'm listening," I said carefully. She withdrew a folder from her handbag, the ever-prepared financial executive, even in emotional moments, and slid it across the table. "We'd like to pay the remaining balance within 2 years instead of 10. We've restructured some investments, and with my year-end bonus—" She trailed off, watching my expression. "Unless that creates tax complications for you?" I scanned the neatly prepared financial documents, noting the substantial increase in monthly payments. "This is significantly accelerated. Are you sure? It's manageable with a baby on the way? Child-related expenses can be—" "We can manage," she assured me. "And honestly, I'd prefer to have this resolved before the baby arrives, to start this new chapter without encumbrances." I understood what she couldn't quite articulate. She wanted her child born into a family unified by choice and love, not legal obligation. She wanted to offer her child something her own parents, for all their financial success, had failed to provide. Authentic family bonds that acknowledged both privilege and struggle, past and future. "I appreciate the sentiment," I said carefully. "But you shouldn't strain yourselves financially at such an important time." Vanessa's expression softened unexpectedly. "We're not. And there's something else." She hesitated, then continued with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "I've been thinking about what you said months ago, about which version of David I fell in love with." I nodded, remembering our confrontational phone conversation. "The truth is," she continued, "I fell in love with glimpses of the real David, that occasionally broke through the persona he thought I wanted. His kindness to struggling colleagues, his genuine interest in my ambitions, beyond what they could contribute to our social standing. His terrible jokes that he can never deliver with a straight face." A wistful smile crossed her features. "These past months, as he's reconnected with parts of himself he'd suppressed, I've fallen in love with him all over again. Not despite his background, but because of how it shaped him into someone capable of both ambition and compassion." The admission, so contrary to the image Vanessa had projected when we first met, rendered me momentarily speechless. "Thank you for sharing that with me," I said finally. "It can't have been easy." "No," she agreed. "Vulnerability has never been my strong suit. My parents—" She shook her head. "Well, let's just say emotional honesty wasn't a family value. But I don't want a parent that way. I don't want my child growing up afraid to show weakness or admit mistakes. I studied her face, the determination in her eyes, the slight tension in her jaw, and recognized the courage this conversation required of her. I think, I said slowly, that recognizing what you don't want to replicate from your own upbringing is the first step to breaking the pattern. The fact that you're conscious of it now, before your child is even born, gives me great hope for the kind of mother you'll become. Relief washed across her features. That means a great deal coming from you. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, the weight of past conflicts gradually lightening between us. There's another matter I wanted to discuss, Vanessa said finally. Something David and I have been considering. She squared her shoulders again, businesslike despite the personal nature of our conversation. The house, the third bedroom that you once proposed moving into, my breath caught. Surely she wasn't suggesting. We'd like to renovate it, she continued, into a proper guest room, specifically for you. For me? I echoed, confused. Not to live in permanently, she clarified quickly. We respect your independence, but somewhere you could stay occasionally. Weekends, holidays. A pause. After the baby comes, perhaps more frequently if you're willing to help. The invitation, tendered with characteristic precision but genuine warmth, was so unexpected I found myself momentarily speechless. David doesn't know I'm discussing this with you, Vanessa admitted. He's been wanting to suggest it for weeks but feared you'd see it as, I don't know, patronizing? Or perhaps too little. Too late? It's neither of those things, I assured her, emotion thickening my voice. I searched for the right word. Healing, she nodded, relief evident in her expression. So you'll consider it? I'll do more than consider it, I said. I'd be honored to accept. The remainder of our lunch passed in surprisingly easy conversation about nursery colors, pediatrician recommendations, and the logistics of balancing. Career and motherhood, topics I'd never imagined discussing with this woman who had once viewed me as an embarrassing obligation. Later that afternoon, I called Janet about the Riverside condo. I'm afraid I need to withdraw my application, I explained. My circumstances have changed. I'm sorry to hear that, she said, disappointment evident. It was such a perfect fit for you. If you don't mind my asking, what changed? I smiled, though she couldn't see it through the phone. Everything, really. I've been offered a different kind of home. Not one I own outright, but perhaps something more valuable. That evening, as I sorted through decades of accumulated belongings, deciding what to keep, what to store, what to pass along, my phone chimed with a text from David. Just heard from Vanessa about your lunch. Is it true? You'll take the guest room? Yes, I replied. Though only if you really want this. Both of you. His response came immediately. We do. I do. So much. Just never thought you'd consider it after everything. I studied his words, sensing the unspoken emotion behind them, the gratitude, the relief, the lingering threads of guilt and hope intertwined. Family is complicated, I texted back, but worth fighting for. 3 simple dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again as he composed his response. Finally, I love you, Mom. Never stopped, even when I was at my worst. Thank you for not giving up on me. The words blurred slightly as unexpected tears warmed my eyes. I love you too. Always have, always will. I set the phone aside and returned to my sorting, this time with a lighter heart. The past 6 months had taught me that reconciliation wasn't a single moment of healing, but a continuous process of recommitment. To honesty, to growth, to forgiveness of both self and others. We would still have difficult moments ahead, no doubt. Old patterns don't disappear overnight. Vanessa would still occasionally retreat behind her polished facade when feeling vulnerable. David would still struggle with fully integrating his past and present selves. And I would still need to maintain healthy boundaries to ensure that my identity remained distinct from my role as mother and future grandmother. But we had found our way back to each other, not through financial leverage or legal coercion, but through the harder, messier work of genuine reconciliation. 3 weeks later, I sat beside David on their back patio, watching Vanessa supervise the contractors renovating what would become my guest room. She had approached the project with characteristic thoroughness, researching ergonomic mattresses suitable for aging joints and installing grab bars in the adjoining bathroom that somehow managed to look elegant rather than institutional. "She's really throwing herself into this," David observed, a note of wonder in his voice. "I've never seen her so invested in a home project." "She wants to get it right," I said. "For all of us." "I still can't quite believe how much has changed," he mused. "When I sent that text—" He shook his head, still unable to directly reference the message that had precipitated our entire conflict. "Life rarely moves in a straight line," I said. "Sometimes we need to hit rock bottom before we can rebuild on firmer foundation." "Seems like an unnecessarily painful approach," he said with a rueful smile. "Perhaps," I acknowledged. "But I'm not sure we'd be here, truly here, authentically connected, if we'd taken an easier path. Sometimes the hardest roads lead to the most worthwhile destinations." Vanessa joined us, settling into a chair with the slight awkwardness of early pregnancy. "The contractors say they'll be finished by next weekend," she reported, "just in time for your first official stay." "Perfect timing," I said. "And how are you feeling? Any morning sickness?" "More like all-day sickness," she admitted with uncharacteristic candor. "Though it's supposedly a good sign. Strong hormone levels." David reached over to squeeze her hand, their matched wedding bands catching the afternoon light. "She's been amazing. Still going into the office every day, despite feeling terrible." "Stubbornness runs in the family," I observed dryly. "Though I'm not sure if it's the Reynolds side or the Harrington influence." To my surprise, Vanessa laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound I'd rarely heard from her. "Definitely both. This poor child doesn't stand a chance." As conversation flowed easily between us about the pregnancy, about the upcoming volunteer session at the community center, about normal, everyday family matters, I felt a sense of peace settle over me that had eluded me for years. The check that arrived in my account each month was no longer a symbol of rejected sacrifice, but simply a financial transaction between family members with mutual respect. The guest room being prepared wasn't a concession extracted through leverage, but a genuine invitation to remain part of their lives. And the child growing within Vanessa wasn't just David's heir, but a new generation that would know its grandmothers. History, complete with struggles, sacrifices, and ultimately resilience. 6 months earlier, I'd stood in my garden reading a text message that shattered my world. A dismissal so casual it had demolished decades of sacrifice and love in an instant. I'd responded from a place of deep hurt, using the only leverage I had, financial power, to force acknowledgement of my worth. Now, sitting in the sunshine of their back patio, I realized the greatest power had never been in my name on a deed, or my ability to demand repayment. It had been in my capacity to offer genuine forgiveness, to remain open to reconciliation even after profound hurt, to recognize growth when it appeared, and to accept that family relationships, like all meaningful human connections, required continuous renegotiation and recommitment. "Mom!" David's voice broke into my thoughts. "You're smiling. What are you thinking about?" I looked at my son, this complex, flawed, evolving human being whom I'd loved since before I held him in my arms, and at his wife, once my adversary, now gradually becoming something I'd never expected. Family by choice, not merely by law. "I'm thinking," I said simply, "that we've come a long way from that text message." Understanding passed between us. Acknowledgement of pain caused and pain endured, of boundaries violated and boundaries now respected, of a journey that had transformed us all. We have, David agreed softly. And we still have a long way to go. Yes, I agreed, reaching out to take his hand. But we're going there together now. And in that moment, imperfect but honest, complicated but genuine, I knew that we had found our way home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.